All right, we're going to continue. We're going to continue with another panel where folks are going to be looking forward, I think, toward solutions and innovations. We're going to look at ways that water is currently creatively being used and creatively being conserved in the basin. This is the only panel with people I hadn't met before, so which means you're safe from horrible introductions. Which is good news. First up is Jim Howell. He's the CEO and founder of Grasslands LLC, which is an organization focused on ecologically regenerative and environmentally profitable grasslands agriculture. Wow, I took that right off your website, I think. So, and I kind of know Jim because about 15 of us on Wednesday went on some flights organized by the Lighthawk organization, where they flew us over in small planes, very small planes, up over the Front Range, mostly right along the divide at times, about 1,000 feet above the ridge line there, in small planes, and it was a little bumpy at times. And so I feel like I know you pretty well now since we've shared a near-death experience. And if the Lighthawk people are watching, it wasn't a near-death experience, but it was a new experience for me. So Jim will start. Then we'll hear from Will Thelander, who is a farmer and irrigator in central Arizona. You know, and I think most of us know the river well enough to know that central Arizona has been hit really hard by restrictions and curtailments. And Will and his colleagues there are feeling the pinch of innovate or go away pretty strongly. So Will's been doing some very interesting things. So he's going to be second. And it's a bit of when I do this, I call it a drive-by consulting, in that he flew in this morning, he's going to give his talk, he's going to fly home right afterwards and be back at work before the sun goes down, maybe. I appreciate it, I really do. We always get criticism at these events that you don't have enough farmers, and I always respond, we ask again and again and again, and they all say no, because they all have better things to do. And Will has other things to do, but he's just cooperative, and so, you know, the nice person always bears the brunt of these things. So he's here, and I appreciate it, Will. Then we'll turn to Liesel Hans, who is with the Alliance for Water Efficiency, who will talk about some water-saving efforts in an urban setting. And then she's going to head right out on family vacation. So, all right, so we won't keep her any longer than we have to. Again, after all three have done their thing, we'll do the facilitated discussion, as we call it, and it will be fun. All right, Jim, you're up.
All right, thanks, Doug. My sound okay there? Yep, all right. Yeah, so I'm Jim Howell. I lead and own this company called Grasslands, which is a ranch management company. One of our big projects is in western Colorado, eastern Utah, so I'm going to talk about that a fair bit today. Those are three photos of the three major landscapes that we manage with that operation. And it's all in the upper basin of Colorado, and more specifically, the Gunnison Basin of the Colorado River Basin. My grandfather actually moved into the upper basin straight from southern England, or my grandfather's ancestors did, straight from southern England in 1892. And my grandmother, his wife's family, moved into Boulder County in 1873. And my great-granddad actually got his law degree here at CU in 1919. So this is kind of a cool confluence of factors that have brought me here. And so it's really a meaningful topic that I get to discuss today, ranching in the upper basin, in a really meaningful venue here for me. So I appreciate the opportunity very much, you guys. It's really humbling, and I'm really grateful to be here. So I'm really grateful and thankful for my deep connection to Colorado. Obviously, I'm a European immigrant. The amount of time my family's been here is a drop in the bucket relative to the Utes and the Arapaho and the Cheyenne. But I still feel like I have a deep sense of place here in Colorado, and I really do love Colorado, and I'm really grateful to be living here. My granddad put together a ranch that in the 30s, which is largely where I grew up. And but we sold it 10 years ago, which was the right decision for my family as a whole. It was really hard on me. And I thought my life was over in Western Colorado. And then I came across Eli and Mike with Conscience Bay Company. You guys mostly know those guys, Eli Feldman and Mike Higuera. And they needed some management oversight on this big operation they were putting together in Western Colorado. And they asked me to collaborate with them. So we started doing that 5 years ago. And so I'm going to talk about that operation quite a bit, about also why I think that beef production is a totally compatible land use in the Upper Basin. I know that there's a variety of perspectives on that, so I'm going to give my perspective. And I'm going to talk about how we're kind of tweaking our operation so that we indeed are adapting to the new water supply reality in the basin. Those are basically the three landscapes. That's kind of high elevation, grassland up in the Forest Service country, lower elevation, semi-arid desert, BLM, winter grazing permits, and then irrigated valleys down on the bottom. So that yellow outline there is the Gunnison Basin within the Colorado River Basin. You zoom in onto that, that's where the current irrigated footprint is relative to the whole basin. That's about 400 square miles relative to 8,000 square miles in the whole basin. So it's about 5% of the total land area. So we haven't talked much about rangeland in this conference the last 2 days, but the ranching industry, beef cattle production, sheep production, is mostly a rangeland-based industry. The only way that we as humans can eat all of the landscape there that is not green is by eating the herbivores that can eat that landscape. They can survive and thrive out there on those rangelands. And the way that our ranching models have developed, they incorporate a huge amount of irrigated land or forage production into the annual forage production chain. If we didn't have that critical irrigated pasture component, we wouldn't have the ranching industry that we currently have. We wouldn't be able to utilize these beautiful, diverse native rangelands to the extent we do. I'm going to talk about that a fair bit here. Just the point is, I was here at this conference last year. There was quite a few allusions to, if we have a water supply problem in the Colorado River Basin, why we're going to feed livestock as opposed to using all our water to grow feed that people can directly consume. It's not that simple, because that's a simplistic, fairly linear perspective from my point of view, because it doesn't take into account these 95% of the land area that we can only raise beef cattle on. And to understand that a critical component of our annual forage production supply chain are these irrigated pastures. And there's all kinds of stuff that are positives associated with irrigated pasture that I'm going to talk about here. Go back. That big chunk down there on the kind of lower left, that's the Uncompahgre Valley. I don't know if you can't see my cursor, but there, Montrose, Olathe, Delta is the Uncompahgre Valley. There is. Oh, right here.
Yeah, there you go.
So that's the Uncompahgre Valley. This is Grand Mesa. This is the Uncompahgre Plateau. Hold on. Uh-oh, this says the battery's running low on this computer. Hopefully it'll persist. That's Blue Mesa Reservoir right there. This is the Black Canyon. Yeah, that's Grand Mesa, Uncompahgre Plateau, San Juan Mountains down here, Sawatch Range up here, West Elks and the Elks right there. The big Uncompahgre Valley right there, that's made possible by a diversion tunnel that goes right through this granite uplift, which is the south rim of the Black Canyon, that was completed in 1909. It still amazes me the lengths to which we went to get water spread out on the desert to grow a little more grass. And that's the footprint of our ranching operation there with what we call Western States Ranches. We kind of have two names, Western States Ranches and Grand Headwaters. You can barely see all the little irrigated dots through there. That's our biggest irrigated property there that takes in 1,200 irrigated acres. Altogether, we farm on 12 farms throughout the valley on about 3,000 irrigated acres. Our land base overall is about 220,000 acres, and we run about 3,000 head of cattle total, not including calves. current season calves. And the yellow there are high elevation summer forest permits. They're all in the basin except for that piece right there, which is the northern boundaries right on the Gunnison Basin boundary, but it falls into the San Miguel and then the Dolores and then the Colorado. And this is another, the brown are winter BLM permits. And this one is out, not in the Gunnison Basin, obviously, but it comes right up to the Colorado River right there. And the Dolores River runs into it right at its corner there. So we have a significant footprint within the Colorado River Basin. And I'm going to talk about kind of how we integrate all that together. I'm just going to quickly go through our annual forage production cycle and really production cycle, so you can see how critical these irrigated pastures are within the context of a year-round ranching enterprise. So I'm going to start basically right now, early June. That's how our pastures look at this time of year. They're primarily a mix of 5 or 6 species of perennial grass and alfalfa, red clover, white clover. The clovers and the alfalfa fix all the nitrogen. We don't put any nitrogen fertilizer out at all. We don't put any fertilizer out, period, other than cattle manure. We don't do any herbiciding, no pesticiding, no nothing other than we just graze it right. And it's a self-contained ecological system there that doesn't require any outside external inputs at all other than water. It also provides all kinds of habitat for pollinators and insects and birds and mammals of every size and shape. So it creates huge habitat, keeps the soil covered year-round. Far more habitat there than any kind of human crop that we could directly eat. That's frequently overlooked when we talk about perennial pasture. It provides habitat for lots of stuff, and it keeps the soil covered year-round. At this time of year, all of our cattle, all of our yearlings, those are yearlings, all of our mother cows are grazing irrigated pasture. So we have a lot of cattle, a lot going on the irrigated ground. In addition to irrigating our fannies off, we're also moving cows constantly, keeping track of cows. Those are more mother cows, more yearlings. Those yearlings go up to their permit, which is the one that drains into the San Miguel right on the south edge of the Uncompahgre Plateau right now. As we speak, those cattle are being trucked up to their their summer permit. While the cattle are in the valley, we get all the calves branded. And then in July, our higher elevation permits we start to go to with our mother cows and their babies. This is up in the West Fork, the Big Cimarron, which is right on the north edge of the San Juans. That's the West Fork, the Big Cimarron. That peak right there is Coxcomb Peak. That's the high point on all our country. It's about 13,400. So back up behind this forest here, we go back up in there, and that's all alpine tundra. So we graze from the alpine tundra down to 4,500 feet or so down near between Delta and Grand Junction. This is up in the Big Cimarrons as well. That's where the Middle Fork and the East Fork of the Big Cimarron merge. Silverjack Reservoir is just to my right. When we meaning European ranchers showed up in this country, we didn't know what we were doing. We still are kind of learning what we're doing. We're still transitioning from being, naive pioneers to natives that actually understand where we live. And we've made a lot of progress in that just over the course of my lifetime and in the course of my 30-year career. We understand that we can't go up to these high elevation pastures early. We got to give that grass a chance to grow. If we do, it expresses itself abundantly, and it's a beautiful, native, incredible biodiverse landscape that is absolutely compatible with being grazed if it's grazed right. I have a whole talk and actual week-long course that I can teach about how you graze these country right. Can't go into the detail there, but we spend a lot of time up there nudging those cows through a migratory pattern throughout those landscapes to make sure that the cows are coming to the grass in the right way and that we're enhancing that landscape through time. We do a lot of biological monitoring at the soil surface to make sure that our management is nudging the ecological integrity of that country in the right direction. So we're gradually learning what we're doing and I think becoming kind of more native to this place. And we have a crew of extremely competent, tough people and horses and dogs that help us get all this done. Meanwhile, while the cows are all up in the mountains, we're irrigating like crazy down in the valley. Some of our pastures are grass dominant like that one. Some tend to be more alfalfa dominant like that one. The alfalfa dominant pastures, we do put a couple of cutting of hay up on. Most of our pastures, though, are very diverse mixes of grass and legumes like that there. which would have been grazed a couple times in the spring. And then we get off of them, we let them grow back all summer long, and we stockpile that grass and take it into the winter. And then we graze it in the winter. That's a more grass dominant one. That's got more legumes in it. But those are both in late October, just before we start grazing them through the winter. Also, meanwhile, while the cows are up in the mountains, hopefully we're getting summer monsoons down in our desert country and growing perennial grass down there. That's a nice stand of galleta grass, as is that. And we also have an incredible diversity of shrubs out there, most of which are palatable to cattle. And we don't have to do any protein supplement for our cows out there in the winter because of the shrub component that the cattle readily consume. So it's actually, even though it looks like tough old desert hard country and you can't believe a cow can make a living out there, actually cows do incredibly well out there. And these grasses need to be grazed, and they do great with grazing. This is a great stand of needle and thread grass, with a beautiful plant of crimson glow mallow in the front there. That's an Indian rice grass plant. And I put that in there. It's the same plant. You can see the stubble of that plant. You can see those yellow stems that have been grazed off right there. Or that's why they're down there at that level, because they were grazed off. And then this is all the current season's growth coming on after having been grazed the previous winter. I'm going to talk about that again here in a second. Following through the year, eventually the quakies start turning yellow. It starts to snow in the high country. And then we have to bring everything back out. We gather all these mountains. It's a massive job. It takes a long time to actually find the last 10% of the cows and get them down out of there. And we come back down to the valley, to the irrigated ground, wean all our calves, which we retain ownership of through another year. And then our yearlings, which were last year's calves, they all get on trucks and we're sold. And that's when our main cash flow event happens. And then our wean calves go into a winter grazing program. We don't hardly feed them any hay through the winter. We mostly just feed them the stockpiled grass, and we strip graze it off with a portable electric fence. So they get a new plate of grass every 1 to 3 days, all through the winter. Most of the hay that we do put up, we feed right during the weaning, preg checking, shipping time, when we have everything in close, that we're doing a lot of working events and we need to have close access. Once we're through that in the fall, everything's pretty much on grazing all winter until the following year. And then out in the desert in Utah, that's out at our Highlands permit near Cisco, Utah. That's looking across at the Liesel Mountains. So most of our mixed age cows head out to that country and graze landscapes that look like that. Also in big herds migrating through this country in different patterns in different years, trying to do a good job with the grass. And this is our other BLM permit, which is Canna Creek. It's between Delta and Grand Junction. Eventually it starts to get hot and dry out there in May, and we spend a lot of time then gathering those cows off the desert and bringing them back to the valley, back to green grass. And so that's the annual cycle. It's a pile of work, as you can imagine, but it's satisfying, really fun work in many ways. Just real quickly, before I get into more details on what we're doing with our water, I just want you to, because it's easy to say we don't need to feed water feed for livestock. It just doesn't look at the whole picture, though, because all those rangelands, yeah, they provide feed for livestock, but they actually need those cattle out there. They need a herbivore of some sort to cycle that biomass, because long-term resting in these environments is not natural, and it leads to long-term degradation. If you look out at that landscape, it might look pretty good. That's a landscape that had been totally rested from grazing animals for 35 years when I took that photo. But if you look down into it, most of those plants are dead. You could just reach down and pull them out of the ground. That's a similar situation on a vacant piece of land on the edge of a subdivision in Grand Junction that hasn't been grazed or disturbed for who knows how long. The grass dies with no disturbance and no grazing eventually. I took those pictures on the same exact day that I took that picture, 1 hour west out on our permit in Highlands near Cisco, Utah. The yellow means that those plants are alive still. That's all grass that grew the previous year, and it turns yellow, obviously, when it starts to frost and it gets dry in the winter. But those plants are alive still because they're getting grazed. So we need livestock out on these landscapes. They need to be properly managed, but we need them out there. And again, a critical component of being able to be out there ranching is having these irrigated patches. that actually in our operation, even though it's only 3,000 acres out of 220,000 acres, those 3,000 acres provide about 35 to 40% of our annual forage production. But it is expensive to grow a garden in the desert. I call it the garden. All that green stuff, it's a garden out there in the middle of what wants to be a desert. Anytime you fight nature, it's expensive. And diverting water and spreading it out on the desert is fighting nature, and it's expensive. And we have a lot of infrastructure sort of like that, a lot of concrete line ditches, a lot of gated pipe. That application happens to use both gated pipe. That's really an expensive patch of irrigated grass right there. And it's not only expensive to put in all the core infrastructure to take the water, to then spread it out on all the individual farms that had to be subsidized with the Bureau of Rec. Otherwise, all this wouldn't be there if it wasn't for government subsidies to put it all in the first place. But then all the infrastructure that we have on our specific farms that we're responsible for maintaining, that's a lot too. There's a huge cost associated with this. And not just gated pipe and concrete line ditches, but we also have center pivots. We had to replace that pump last year, which was brutally expensive. We have wheel lines, we have siphon tubes, we got it all, and it's all expensive. So it's difficult for cows to pay for all that. It's difficult for any kind of agriculture to pay for all that. And when we buy a new farm, that's become very clear to me how expensive it is, because we always inherit a huge amount of deferred maintenance when we buy a new farm. And that indicates to me that through the decades, there hasn't been enough money in farming to maintain that infrastructure that we have to have if we're going to grow this garden. So is there a way to add more value to our water? That's why we're interested in being part of this whole movement. Okay, water's becoming scarce. Other users might have a greater demand for it. Is there a way that we can get paid for potentially sending some of our water down the river that might end up making our whole enterprise actually more financially viable? So we're working through that and trying to figure all that out right now. That's Perry Cabot there in the middle with a funny hat. He's a extension researcher at the Colorado State Ag Experimental Station in Fruita. And last year we did a curtailment experiment on 5-acre plots with curtailing irrigation at different points throughout the season, trying to understand the impact on annual productivity by curtailing irrigation in June 1st, July 1st, et cetera, and comparing that to no irrigation at all. And so we're still compiling the results of all that. We're looking at the impact this year on that curtailment treatment, or those curtailment treatments on the different plots, on the impact on the pasture this year. And we're participating in the SCPP program this year also at a significant scale, again, trying to learn and figure out this balance between curtailing and still maintaining an economically viable level of production, not setting our pastures back significantly, et cetera. So this is on one of the curtailment pastures last year. The water was shut off or curtailed on the 1st of July. All this country would have been grazed twice, kind of in May and June. So 2 grazing events in May and June. So we would have harvested a couple tons per acre during those 2 grazing events. And then by July 17th, it's still green, still looking good, even though irrigation's been curtailed. But by mid to late August, that patch was starting to burn up. But it was okay at the end of the day because we still had some biomass there to take into the winter and graze. It's conceivable that we can make this work. It's not conceivable that we can make that work. That was total curtailment, no irrigation as of July 17th. That strip was basically a couple strips down from that strip. So if we do that in too much, we're going to kill everything. And we're going to have a windblown weed patch. And that's what nobody wants that. Andy was talking about all the community benefits that these irrigated pastures bring, the wetlands, the wildlife habitat, the beauty, the recreation opportunities for the communities that we have there. That does not address any of those values right there if we quit irrigating pasture. So that garden brings a lot of value, drives the local economy. That's why people came there to begin with, because of good, reliable water that comes down off these snowpack reservoirs. You know what's going to happen every year. Sometimes it happens more or less, but every year we're going to get snow and it's going to melt and we're going to have water to irrigate. So that's why people came and settled this country. Without people or without the water, not that many people would be there and there wouldn't be much of an economy. These perennial crops, not just pasture and hay, but also orchards, they create year-round soil cover, greatly reducing wind erosion. We get a lot of wind there in the spring. All the fields that are in human edible crops that are not planted in March and April yet, we get a lot of wind-blown dust off those things. It's not pretty. Some days are not pretty. A lot of people come in to recreate in those surrounding mountains. They land in Montrose. Believe me, if they were coming in and landing in a wind-blown weed patch dust storm, it would not be nearly as attractive as it is now coming down and landing in this verdant valley. So yeah, if we curtail irrigation significantly up there, it's going to completely change that landscape. But I do think we can reduce the amount of water that we use. It's going to impact our production, no question. But again, with this perennial pasture, we can still keep the ground covered. Even in that curtailed pasture that might dry up in July or August, that biomass is still there. That dormant biomass is still there. It's still protecting the soil. Nothing's blowing away. And we're building soil organic matter with those perennial pastures. That's another point I meant to make is when we take these new farms on, they've typically been monoculture crop for a long time. Soil organic matter is down around 1 or 2%. Our perennial pastures that have been established the longest are about 7% soil organic matter. So that's another huge environmental benefit that happens via perennial pasture. Yeah, so I'm not saying that we're going to curtail irrigation on all of our country on July 1 or whatever, because I think that is going to cause long-term damage, and I don't think we can have an economically viable enterprise if we do that. But I do think it's conceivable that we could curtail irrigation in a June 1 or July 1 or August 1 cutoff across a third of our country, for example. And then we'd switch up which third we do that on each year. So a pasture might have 2 years of regular full irrigation, 1 year of summer curtailment. And I even actually think that might enhance the resilience of our pastures by going through that 1 out of 3 years of stress. Because when you get stressed, you get stronger. If you're not too stressed. If you get too stressed, you die. But if you get stressed just the right amount, that's why we work out and run. That's stressful, but that makes us stronger. I think the same thing happens with pastures if they get stressed periodically. Makes those root systems go deeper and potentially more resilient for the dry times and warmer times that are ahead of us. And if we can get compensated for this conserved consumptive use at an adequate level, we would totally be incentivized to do this. And I think this could be a major part of the solution that we all, to the problems we're all talking about here. Anyway, the future, that was the topic of my talk. I think it's bright, but it's also going to be super challenging. But what makes human life worth living is engaging in these complex, wicked problems with like-minded, smart people collaborating together to try to figure things out. That's what brings meaning and fulfillment, satisfaction to our lives. So I'm excited to be in the middle of it all, and I'm really encouraged by the obvious intelligence and care and love for this topic that's exemplified in this room. Thank you.
Thank you, Jim. Will, do you have slides?
Yeah, I do.
All right. Oh, there you go.
Hi.
Jim, I think I'm stressed just the right amount, by the way. So.
You look like it.
Okay. It's making me stronger. I know it is.
Okay. Well, thank you for having me here. My name's Will Thelander. Just want to go over real quick with who I am so you know who you're talking to. That's me on the right, my dad and my cousin. Those are my business partners out in Pinal County, Arizona. My grandpa started farming out there, so that makes me a third-generation Arizona farmer. Proud to be one. And we managed about 7,000 acres. After the recent water cuts in 2019 and 2020, we had to fallow about 2,000 of those acres because of those cuts. Traditionally, our main crops have been cotton, corn, alfalfa, wheat, barley, essentially anything that we can move the water to. There's an economic incentive for us to do so and we could make some money at it was whatever we decided to grow. And then partially here to talk about our new crop that we're working on called Waiuli that I've been working with Bridgestone Tire Company for the last 5 years on. Okay, so first off, sometimes I hear in the news and stuff about farmers wasting water and stuff, like the articles you read in the paper, and I just wanted to do a little background information about how hard we work to conserve every single drop. So here's a few examples of what we do. The bottom one is a filter station for a subsurface drip installation. I'll show you how that goes into the ground later. That's a center pivot, which you pointed out earlier. So basically get the water as efficiently to the crop as we possibly can. And then when we can't afford those super expensive systems, we have GPS leveling equipment to basically we want the water to drift downhill at the perfect efficiency level. So when it gets to the end of the field, none of it runs out, none of it goes anywhere, and the plants use as much as possible. We don't want the water running anywhere. We want as little as evaporation as possible. We are doing everything that we possibly can think of and do to save as much water out there because we're paying for it. It causes problems for us. We don't like wasting water. We're all in this together. You know, we are trying everything and anything we can think of. So just a little, so this is what I've been working on and why I had to fly in this morning, and I'm flying out tonight and working on a subsurface drip installation project on the farm right now. So this is what it looks like. So basically it's a flat tube that goes about 10 inches underground. You pump the water into it, and it's got little holes all the way across it, and then you water the ground up. So there's no surface water that evaporates away. So only the plant gets to use the water, and we don't grow weeds. We only just spoon feed the crop exactly what it needs. And it saves on fertilizer, it saves on pesticides, it saves on tractors, diesel, everything. It's very great, but it's insanely expensive to do. I have it around $3,500, $3,800 an acre for installation. So here's just a little look of it. So the tractor's injecting it into the field, and the tape's going down in, and it's just going along and laying it down there. So every 36 inches is a new drip tape line, and they're laid out in about 20-acre blocks. So just kind of something interesting we do. So this is leveled ground. So you can see by a couple of these pictures, there's no tailwater. So the ground's perfectly flat. We flood the corn. I feed this to local dairy cattle for milk. So you can see that there's no tailwater. We do it as efficiently as possible. And you can see how dense it is, you know, desert everywhere and then a huge corn crop right on that. And that's how we feed all of our dairy cattle. I just put some videos in because they're more interesting than me. Got a drone this year. It's kind of fun. So on the left there of my truck, you can see the water running to the next field. I'm heading out to make sure, you know, we're watering on the right schedule, not wasting water. That's what we're always trying to do. And here's my new crop. This is called Waiuli. It's a native desert shrub, and it can produce a natural form of rubber. So this is a new alternative to the rubber trees that we've been getting from Indonesia for all of our rubber uses since we've been using rubber. So all tires need about 20% natural rubber. Without that, there's no synthetic version. You need 20% of natural rubber, and all of that's coming from Indonesia and Micronesia and all those places. So deforestation, lots of rubber plants going in. And basically they go each day and they scrape the side of a tree, and somebody getting paid 10 cents a day goes and collects all the rubber. And that's how we get all of our rubber for all of our things. So me and Bridgestone have been working to develop this, which is going along good. And we think it can be economically viable for the Southwest as a new plant that will be not only more efficient, but will help us for several other reasons I'll explain in a bit. So here's what makes the plant so interesting for this type of talk. So on the far left is alfalfa, and it uses about 6 acre-feet of water a year. And someone doesn't know, I always say, picture an acre, go 1 foot down, that's an acre foot. So it uses the most water. That's because the plant grows 10 months a year out in Arizona. We have the most productive alfalfa land, I think, in the country. Us in one spot in Texas, I think, because we got a lot of sunlight. It's very good soil. We have very efficient systems. So we can grow up to 12 tons a year per acre if everything's installed right. So here's some of the other crops that we grow. Wheat, it's 3.4 acre feet, which you would look at and go, hey, that's pretty close to Waiuli. But wheat is grown in 4 months. So that water is slammed in there and then turned off. Waiuli is a year-round crop, so it only uses 3 feet for the entire year. Cotton, 4.5, silage corn for feeding cattle, 5. So it's a very efficient plant and doesn't need that much because it comes from the desert. It's used to it. That's its natural environment, is only getting a little bit of water. So a little bit of history on Waiuli. They tried doing it back in 1916. And during the First World War and then World War II, I think they really tried to get going with a form of rubber for World War II. There's actually a city in Arizona called Goodyear. I don't know if anyone ever heard of it, but that's because of Waiuli, and most people don't know that. So just some interesting there. Here's one of the real big benefits of this plant. It's a perennial, and they don't know how long it'll be there, but basically you plant the crop. In 2 years, you get to harvest the crop. Now you're watering the crop throughout this about 3 acre feet a year. After that 2 years, you can chop it off. It grows back. So what does that mean? You're not disturbing the soil. You're not running tractors. You're not replanting. You're not doing all the other stuff that you have to do with almost any crop you can think of. You have to redo it out there, unless you have very specific types of no-tillage systems, but I don't have time to talk about that. So it's a very promising crop for the environment, natural habitat too, having a natural plant out there for the bees. I have a bunch of beekeepers by my fields because they love it because it blooms twice a year and makes really good honey. So I got all the honey I can eat, which is nice. So there's not many crops out there like this, just for, alfalfa, but alfalfa dies after about six years, and then you gotta go in and redo the whole thing. So this is a very unique crop for the desert and what it could do. And cool thing, my rubber was in the Indy 500. So I just thought that was cool. Okay, so some closing thoughts. So one, we're always trying to save as much water as we can. So the main reason I'm here is to explain we do everything we can, and when everyone's making these big decisions on where the water's flowing, know that we're doing everything we can to save water. We're not burning water. We're not doing anything like that. And then why do we want to grow things in Arizona? One, the infrastructure is already there, but two, it's got great soil and great sunlight. Where there's not water, there's also not clouds. That means we have a lot of sun. So we can grow crops year-round and the most efficiently as possible. Where it rains a lot, you can't do tractor work. You can't plan properly. You do not get the same type of output that you do in these areas. So everyone always says, why the hell are we growing stuff in the middle of a desert? I sometimes respond, why are you putting cities in the middle of a desert? But we are the most productive per square, per acre, essentially in the entire country in Pinal, Arizona. So most people don't think about it in those terms. And then the other reason I always say to keep things going, it took 100 years or so to get these systems in place. I'm talking about the cotton gins, the cooling sheds, the shipping facilities for all the food, all these different infrastructure things. When people talk about, it's like, well, let's just not grow there anymore. These light switches do not get flipped overnight. And I always use the example of, during COVID, we shut down things for a few weeks and we thought we could just turn back on the switch. We're still having logistical issues 4 years later with everything. So it applies to anything. You can't just move something overnight. Now we can incentivize, new crops to where we use less water, helping farmers and ranchers use less water, and then help us financially be able to make that possible where we still stay in business. And then the final thing I always like to remind people of is sometimes they think we can just import all of our food. We can import all of our rubber. You can just find it somewhere else and somewhere for cheaper. But global supply strain, world events, 2024, I hear we're having an election. Things might go crazy. You never know. So local food, local clothing, local rubber, I think is essential for security of us as a nation, as a continent, honestly. So I think it's important to keep those factors in mind, not just, why they're using 70% of the water, the farmers, why do they need to use so much water? My grocery store is always filled. Seems okay to me. Let's turn off the tap. There's a lot more to it than that, in my opinion. I just hope everyone always keeps that in mind and how long it takes to get these things in place and all that other stuff. So that's about all I have to say.
All right. Well done. Liesel, you're going to have some pretty good pictures to compete.
Do what I can.
All right.
Alert, alert.
Security.
Security.
What did you do?
Dangerous. Any thoughts on this? I'm trying to click it.
Can you see it on there?
See if I can.
Oh, I have to shut his off.
Okay,
Sorry.
all good.
There's another one on there.
Actually, went too fast.
I was like, oh.
It's frozen. IT support?
So,
They won't let us close either of them down. Thank you.
well, I can see it, but you guys can't. So there we go. Okay. Promise it's good. Thank you for having me here. This is my first time at this conference and my first time at the law school here. And I'm an economist by training, but my mother from a very young age said I should be a lawyer. So it's good to be here. I'm Liesel. I work for the Alliance for Water Efficiency. We're conveners of people and ideas. We're a member-based organization working to advance a sustainable water future by way of using and maximizing and optimizing what we already have. So we do that through collaboration, research, and really advocating for all the tools in the toolbox that we need to get there. So I am in the business of using less water, and wonderful campaigns like this from Denver Water, very ingenious, mass appeal, but they're all framed in a scarcity mindset, right? Use only what you need. Imagine a day without water. Every drop counts. Save, conserve, do less, have less. And, in the Colorado River Basin, it can be very easy to get consumed by the scarcity mindset. And it is very true that we won't ever have enough water, probably won't ever have enough certainty, but there's always an abundance of paths forward. So my call to you all today is to embrace that abundance mindset. So embrace that, exemplify it, empower it throughout your teams and your organizations. That way we can get out of, or at least away sometimes, of the zero-sum game mindset and really think about how we can all work to advance great solutions and lift each other up in that process. I was tasked with talking about how we're making cities more water smart. And I won't stand up here and pretend like I have some magic checklist or that any of us in the room have all of the answers, myself included. But I will offer a little bit of vision and some great examples along the way. So from where I sit, water smart communities are data informed, and they use that data and they make it actionable. They're continuously learning, growing, adapting, moving forward. They're committed to collaboration, both kind of within their organizations, within their city limits, but also beyond their own borders. And they're also taking action. real action. So not just waiting to see what's going to work for someone else, waiting for someone else to figure it out. They're moving forward, even if it's a little bit messy. They're taking action, they're experimenting, they're exploring, they're piloting to figure it out. So some people sort of refer it to as sort of failing fast and failing forward. And then they share it all with each other because these people are very collaborative. So a water smart city really understands its dependence on water and understands that it does not necessarily need more water to survive or thrive, but that it needs more diversified, multi-benefit, multi-purpose solutions. And really, these water smart cities are working for a more sustainable future for their whole population, right? We want both the sustainability as well as the equitable future. So where should we start today? You might have seen that there's a memorandum of understanding across municipal and public water supply providers. They came together in 2022 across both the upper and lower basins. And this document really underscores and highlights the importance of water conservation over the past few decades. And they've really made great progress in highlighting that this sector in particular is really collaborative and sharing across the basins in terms of what's working well and how to do better. Here's a little quote from the MOU and highlights since 2000 that they've decreased annual water usage by over 1 million acre feet and really commit to a variety of things, which I'll get to in a little bit. One thing that I look for in a water smart community is how they're planning for the future. And CRB, of course, has taught us nothing if not that the future will not look like the past. And so it's important while the collective royal we are all working to figure out how the water supplies are going to be different in the future, it's also important to understand how the demands are going to be different in the future. I live just up the road in Fort Collins. I worked up at the city for many years, leading their water conservation team and their initiatives. So this is, let's go back to that year 2000. In Fort Collins, there's about 120,000 people in the city's service area. There's multiple water providers, I won't get into that. But it's about 9 billion gallons per year was used by the community. Since then, I don't know if you know, but Fort Collins is an awesome place to live. It has grown and exploded in both population as well as industry. So I'm gonna get your blood flowing. You've been sitting for a while. So raise your hand if you think since 2000, water demands have increased with that population growth and growing economy. Brave souls, yes. All right, raise your hand if you think those 9 billion gallons that saved, let's say relatively consistent despite that population growth. Wonderful. And who thinks it has decreased in spite of all of that? It makes sense while each of you answered it the way you did probably. And for many, many years, as populations grew, demands also grew. But if we look at their 2023 graphic, and admittedly this is in gallons per capita per day, but I'll do the mental math for you. 2000 on your left-hand side is at 9 billion gallons. 2023 is down closer to 6 billion gallons. And admittedly, 2023 was nice and wet, so we didn't use as much water, but you see the trend there. So the problem comes when we don't trust this data, and we don't trust the very real success of both passive as well as accelerated demand management strategies. And there can be a really high cost to not believing this data. And I admit that there are other examples out there that don't look exactly like this in the CRB, but there are many, many communities. This is just where I live, so I used it. Water Research Foundation did a study looking at demand forecasting and found many, many examples where we end up with this, what's called a porcupine image. And this is from San Diego. It's one of many examples. It's just the most colorful one for this presentation today. But you see a series of very wrong demand forecasts, which continue to believe that water demands will increase as populations and economies change. And so the challenge is that there can be a very serious cost to this. And so what we're hoping to see more of is communities that are smart about how they're planning for the future and understanding future demands. So they're moving away from just taking a gallons per capita per day times a population number and coming up with some magic upward trajectory line. So this is City of Phoenix. They were also in that WRF study, and their image is there on the left. But you can see on the right, this is from their 2021 Water Resources Plan, and you can see it's very different different picture in terms of how they're projecting into the future. If you dig into that amazing document, it's very comprehensive and it's very data intensive. So they're looking at how their population's changing, but they're also understanding that the built environment has fundamentally changed and will continue to change. And then new development, whatever growth looks like, will also be quite different from what it was in the past through a variety of passive things that are just happening, as well as really smart policies and programs that are in place. So the problem is that when we over-project, we can sometimes over-invest. AWE has supported a number of studies over the years that have shown with sustained demand reductions, you can help delay, defer, downsize, or outright avoid various very big capital costs. So this example is from Los Angeles, so LA Department of Water and Power. And there's a study that looked at, okay, what would have happened if from 1990 forward we had kept same gallons per capita per day, which for them was 180, versus what actually happened you see in the blue line. And the analysis showed that over time they were able to avoid $11 billion worth of costs associated with water supplies and treatment and pumping costs, all of those things. And as Adele referred to yesterday from Metropolitan, that water rates are going to continue to go up. They're one of the fastest rising expenses that households are facing today. That's not entirely because of water supply challenges, right? This is not the only challenge communities and utilities are facing. Regardless, rates are going to continue to go up, but the important result from this and many other studies like it have shown that with those savings and the reduced conservation or the reduced demands over time, bills would have been about 36% higher under that other future that was possible there. So this can have very real impacts, but we have to be willing to avoid those costs. It's not enough to sort of celebrate it looking backward. We have to be realistic about it moving forward. So, and I know that's hard in our risk-averse world. We love building things. We love a good ribbon cutting, the gold shovel. We love it all. So climate's changing. Our cities are changing. And so one tenet is really being smart about how we're planning for the future. So let's get back to that MOU. Within the MOU, there's 5 areas, big areas of commitment, and I'll walk you through some examples in each of these. The first one, continue and expand programs. So conservation has worked, it's going to continue to work, and really expanding and growing upon that great foundation that exists already across the Colorado River Basin communities. And so what I like to celebrate in this one is not only just doing more of what we already know continues to work, but seeing a lot of, albeit quiet evolution and quiet innovation that's happening in this space. One example is what I kind of call informational services that more and more communities are moving into, where they're collecting disparate and diverse sets of information, bringing it all together and delivering it to the end users in a way that's actionable, through actionable insights. So the example here on your left is from the city of Westminster, Colorado, Leak Alert program, where they can use their advanced metering infrastructure, AMI, smart meters, where utilities now have hourly water reads instead of monthly or even every other month reads of understanding, and they can proactively reach out to you all and say, it looks like you might have a leak. It looks like your water use is significantly higher than it normally is, and help folks address those proactively before they get really high bills that if you're only looking at your monthly water bill, you have no idea of where to start. So these are great examples, and AWE did a study looking at leak notification programs, and while there wasn't a CRB community in that study for me to pull out, the example from Fort Worth, Texas found that these proactive notifications can save, I think it was 2 gallons per meter per day. And when you scale that up across their entire service area, that's like 500 acre feet per year, just from sending these proactive notifications and avoiding unnecessary water use and waste. The example on your right here is a landscape water budget program, which collects information about the landscapes and weather, and then every month sends a report about how you're doing relative to the water use that would be efficient for that landscape versus what you actually did. And the cool thing is that this is, these programs are largely designed for more commercial landscapes. So it's not only sent to the customer, which might just be somebody who pays the bill, but it's sent to the property manager, the community manager, different, maybe an HOA board member, a landscaper, an irrigation contractor, and it creates this sort of circle of accountability where they can then have the common information to make decisions about for their property. And so we as utilities have lots of great programs, but we don't always have to be very prescriptive about what we do in order to make progress. Number 2, reduce non-functional turf grass by 30%. This has easily been sort of the shiniest and spiciest of the things out of the MOU. But what I want to sort of first highlight is that while I paraphrase that for the purpose of a nice looking slide, if you go on to read in the MOU, that talks about transforming to drought tolerant, climate appropriate landscapes. So not just thinking let's swap it all out for concrete and rock. Let's think about our outdoor spaces as real amenities in our communities that offer multiple benefits. So these programs are also actively thinking about how do we then incorporate more native plants to support pollinators and biodiversity. They're thinking about how do we sort of expand how people can make use of these community spaces. Trees are really important, mitigating urban heat. So lots of these programs are really thinking about how to protect and encourage more trees and protect the shade in our communities. One example of partnership here that's exciting is in San Diego, the water utility and the stormwater watershed protection organizations have come together to help support transformation, really well-designed transformation of commercial landscapes to be able to both save water and reduce runoff so that we don't have those pollutants going into our waterways. And this program continues to expand because we're seeing both results happening. This takes a lot of work and a lot of data to do well. It's a big goal and it's getting a lot of attention. We convened a group of the folks in the MOU to talk about non-functional turf and really talk through how are we defining it? What really does it mean to be so-called non-functional, which everybody has different opinions on, but the ship has sailed on a different word. Unfortunately. But there's a lot of work that goes into this and a lot of data that cities don't historically have, or at least have on a regular basis to make really well-informed decisions. So folks are working really hard at this. This is from Albuquerque. They're doing a fantastic process with this where they're working both with academic partners as well as nonprofit partners and engaging the community pretty extensively to understand where this might exist out in their communities, what types of properties, and how do we want to define that and define our steps moving forward. So just a few examples here. But even though this is really hard work and involves lots of people with lots of opinions, it can also be very pretty work. Number 3, increase water reuse and recycling where it's feasible. So we're moving away from this concept of sort of a linear thought of water into, our 3 R's, reduce, reuse, recycle. We're also adding reclaim and restore into that system, thinking more about water circularity and a one water concept, where we think about how do we maximize the uses of the different water for different purposes and then maximize the use of them over time. This is just a snapshot from the Denver Water's new administration building, which really highlights the different ways different water sources can be used for different purposes, reused in the system in different ways. So there's lots of potential for this to make a big difference in communities. We're seeing both distributed as well as more centralized systems. And my only encouragement here is similar to the demand forecasting encouragement, is to think and plan very carefully about what you expect for both the supply and demand for those systems, because we don't want to assume those supplies and demands will always be there if that might not be true into the future. And we also don't want to overinvest in systems that then might end up as stranded assets. So really thinking thoughtfully about these systems, but they can be very effective and beneficial in the communities. Number 4, implement best practices and sharing lessons learned. This one actually has a lot within it. There's a whole bunch of subparts of this in the MOU, and I've thrown it up here for you to see. What I'll first point out is that water touches everything in our lives and our economies. So the folks that are on the ground planning this work and doing this work, they are jacks and jackies of all trades. They have to know a lot about a lot. They have to help support lots of different types of customers, lots of different strategies for different end uses. There's a lot that goes into this work, and there's no degree in water demand management out of there. These are scrappy, resourceful, creative people that just learn by doing, which probably makes them my favorite people in the water business, sorry. But the other point I want to make about this is that this is not just about saving water. These have a lot of additional benefits beyond even what I've added here to this slide. So we talked about with landscapes, both shade and stormwater pollinators, accelerating water loss control, making sure it takes a lot of energy and resources to get that water, to move that water, to treat that water, to distribute that water. And so if we're helping to accelerate water loss control, we're also saving energy, we're recovering revenue. We're also being a lot smarter about how we're doing asset management, just not sort of using simplified information about where we're targeting which assets to repair and replace, or being a lot smarter about what's going to make the biggest difference for our operations as well as, of course, our customers. I'll hit on a couple of notes here, though. A smart city really understands that water and land use are inextricably linked, and therefore the planning and organization and coordination of that should be linked. However, even when you have all of everybody under the same organizational umbrella, we often live in different worlds and different silos. So one exciting area of progress in this is what are known as the Growing Water Smart workshops. And these are really fantastic experiences where they take people away from their lives for a couple of days, get them offsite out of their normal worlds, and they bring water planners, land use planners, as well as some elected officials, decision makers, to better understand the various data that we know about our water and communities, and then come together and explore the world of opportunity that's out there to do better together, as well as start strategizing what should come next. The cool things that come out of this are so many different examples out there, whether it's allocation policies, development review processes, new comprehensive plans, landscape ordinances. There's a lot of exciting work in this place. And especially it's really helping people to understand how I suppose silly it is to, on one hand, incentivize people to replace their landscapes or to install a more efficient toilet when then we allow it in new development, a high water use landscape or an inefficient fixture, for example. So really helping to connect the dots not only organizationally, but in terms of our existing and future built environment. The other point that I will make about these incredible strategies is the ability to create partnerships as well as help our most vulnerable households and businesses in our communities. So there's a variety of programs out there that really address the fact that we have a whole suite of customers that have been historically underserved or left out of conservation strategies, and the ability to use less water and save more on their bills because it's expensive and time consuming to even just replace a toilet. And so direct install programs as well as other fantastic strategies have come about. And these are really great examples where partnerships can be made with water and energy utilities. So bring natural gas and the electric partners to play so that we're delivering more holistic solutions for our customers and really improving the comfort in their home and their quality of their lives. The other outdoor example here is from Long Beach, and they have a direct install program that they're experimenting with outdoor and really transitioning to water-wise landscapes. And the other cool thing about a lot of these programs is that they are partnered with other organizations that offer workforce development. So you see a lot of young faces in there. These are often done through like Conservation Corps type programs, Youth Corps programs. So a lot of wonderful benefits and synergies in this place. And the last commitment area is, of course, collaboration with other users. So I want to highlight collaboration in terms of both collaborating with their communities, collaborating within their organizations and related governmental partners, but also beyond their borders and with other water users. They recognize that what's happening in the urban space is connected to what's happening in the other spaces. And while I didn't get into it as much today, there's been lots of examples shared about how cities are partnering in terms of working with farmers and ranchers. They're working with recreation. They're working in watershed protection. They're working on behalf of the environment, trying to keep more water in the river. So generally, a whole suite of collaboration with other water users. I'll end with a few things. There's this wonderful article from the LA Times just gave me all these quotes for this presentation, so I don't have to come up with the words myself. Some of these quotes are from Felicia at Stanford, as well as I think Adele is quoted on my next slide from Metropolitan. So we need to get out of, I think I heard somebody recently call it the hydro-illogical cycle, where we sort of panic in the dry years and then we forget about it all in the wet years. Really, in order to do this work well, it has to be consistently supported, consistently funded, and a consistent message to our community. And conservation, as well as really smart demand management strategies, have time and time again proven to be very cost-effective strategies in the long run for communities. And there are folks out there who are eager and willing to do this work, and they are doing this work, and they just need more support from you all out there. So I will end here with a reminder of the sort of the call to action of embracing this abundance mindset and encouraging more of these solutions, as well as sharing of these solutions, as well as what's working and not working. And normally I would say, I'll be here all day, let's connect and talk more, but I am heading to our annual camping trip after this at a reservoir along the Colorado Big Thompson system. So yay for multi-benefit projects. But in that spirit, I didn't want to leave you hanging. So I put together a blog. So if you scan this QR code, it'll take you to a blog that has also a lot of the resources that I talked about today, or the examples I talked about today, as well as a few steps that you all can take moving forward to help your communities, whether it's giving the people that work in your organization a pat on the back and saying great job, or helping in terms of other ways. So I really appreciate your time today. Thank you for having me. Let's get connected and continue the conversation.
All right, that was fantastic. What are we looking at question-wise?
Apparently, people didn't go into a total food coma after lunch. So, yeah, the queue's.
All right, let's have them.
The first question has just about Will's drone, and if he brought it, it might be available for the after party. I don't know what that's about.
I didn't have room in my bag, unfortunately, but
Sorry about that. Okay. Disappointing. Overarching question. I think the way it was originally posed was for our ag gentlemen, Jim and Will, but I'm going to tweak it a little bit so it pertains to Liesel's presentation as well. The question is to this effect: amazing work shared here. How representative are the approaches that you've discussed among, in the case of the agricultural sector, neighboring farmers and ranchers, or in the case of Liesel's presentation, municipalities, other municipalities?
Excuse me. Yeah, I can talk about, so in my Maricopa-Stanfield Irrigation District, I can tell you almost 99% of all the farmers out there are using every efficiency we can think of, because obviously we lost our water in 2019, so we have to come up with new ideas. But even before that, we didn't have unlimited water, so we were always trying to be as efficient as possible. And just a simple thing for people to remember is, we are paying for the water on our operations. So wasting anything in a business is never what you want to do, especially when it's one of your major inputs of your business. So I don't ever see a crop going into the ground where the ground looks like this and they're just going to waste a bunch of water just because that person's not going to be in business next year. So it's a money thing. We also, all of us care. So I can tell you all of my neighbors are doing whatever they can. Now the drip installation, the center pivots, those are very, very expensive. So I got a grant from Arizona this year to help me put in my part of this system. So those grants are very important to help them get more efficient, because they want to do it, but you pencil it out. This system I showed you guys, it won't pay for itself in 10 years without the grant assistance. So they would like to do more, but they're doing everything they can.
Some other thoughts on from the ag perspective?
Yes. This stuff is all really hard to do in terms of day-to-day implementation. It takes really skilled people. I'm talking especially on the grazing management side of things. People that are very observant and really love doing this. It's hard to find those people, and so we're lucky to have a crew of people that are switched on and really want to do a good job, but it's rare. What we do in terms of grazing our irrigated pasture as opposed to haying it is not done very to the extent that we graze it, and to the extent that we intensively manage it is not very common. It's increasingly common relative to when I began my career 30 years ago, but it's still not common. Up on our rangeland and country, though, we have to collaborate with our Forest Service and our BLM personnel And so there's been a push towards obviously more sustainable or regenerative or range management through time. And we've definitely corrected a lot of the damage that was inflicted upon the Western rangelands in the early days of ranching up into the 1950s or so. We've done a much better job from that point forward. And I would say it's accelerated significantly just in my career for the last 30 years. And really on the rangeland side of it, on the public rangeland side of it, the environment now with our government agencies is better than it was 30 years ago during the cattle free by 93, no move by 92, whatever it was when I first just got going. A lot of that has shifted over the last 30 years, and now it's actually easy to work with our forest and BLM personnel, especially if you're proactive and trying to do a good job. They make your life easy. So it's kind of a mixed bag, but definitely it's on an improving trend, I would say. Yep.
Liesel, I know you provided tons of case studies, but yeah, any thoughts on the prevalence of the different measures that you discussed?
It's varied, certainly. There's a wide range of what different communities are doing, what communities are, and decision makers, maybe I should say, are willing to tolerate and support. So there's a variety in terms of support, as well as how resourced different communities are to do this work, as well as being able to take action with the right tools in place. So I mentioned like advanced metering infrastructure, smart meters. Some communities have those, but have no way of accessing the data in a way that they can use and they can help their customers make use of. So making sure the investments that we are doing are really useful for the purposes, as well as sort of understanding at an organizational support level that's not always in place as much as I'd love to see it across the board. And so the more that we can do to have leaders and decision makers support this important work and not get so focused on their individual situation, but think more broadly like we have been doing here at this conference. And admittedly, some communities are very small, so it may not make sense to have sort of the staff and scale, but understanding maybe how more regional programs can help support lots of smaller agencies that exist in this world that just don't have the time or resources to tackle this important work.
Great, thank you. The next couple questions, I'm going to, again, exercise facilitator's prerogative and consolidate them. But they grow out of a comment that Jim made at the front end of his remarks. So people live in a place and they get to know it, right? They get to know the place and the place gets to know them or shapes them, right? So these questions have to do with, I guess you'd say, rangeland ecology or rangeland management and native peoples, indigenous peoples. The overarching question is, are indigenous practices of land management part of the future for ranching? If so, how? And then the connected question to that is, how was landscape health maintained before livestock? Do you see much of a role for native ungulates?
You know, I would love to know how the Utes were managing their horses and sheep and goats before my family showed up, and to understand better those grazing patterns that drove them. I came across a paper that was discussing the expedition of General Beale trying to figure out a railroad route from Santa Fe to Salt Lake or something. And they actually came right through my family's ranch and a ranch that we used to manage. And he described the Utes with enormous herds of horses and goats on all the surrounding hillsides. And so I would do anything to go back and see that and talk to those guys and understand their annual grazing pattern. You know, I would assume that because they were interacting with a much less fragmented, much more intact landscape spatially than we do with ranching with straight lines and straight fences everywhere, that they were able to incorporate probably a migratory pattern of grazing with their domestic herbivores that was similar to the migratory patterns of the original bigger herds of migratory native herbivores that would have been out there. So, you know, there's indigenous herding cultures that still exist in lots of the world. There's there's in addition to North American, Native American reservations. I know, you know, there's a lot still going on in the Navajo Nation that I could probably learn a lot from. And so, yes, I'm super open to understanding that stuff better. In terms of incorporating natives back into the landscape, those natives are already in the landscape. We graze a lot of elk in our country, I can tell you that. You know, in terms of proactively managing them and harvesting them and selling them, you know, that's totally illegal now. They're a public resource that everybody can enjoy if they're so inclined. But we're a long ways from bringing natives back as our primary protein source. I'm open to it, though. I mean, those animals are adapted to those landscapes, supremely adapted. So it'd be great. But they're hard to manage. It's a lot easier to nudge a cow around where you want it to go than a big herd of elk.
Fascinating. Thanks so much. Will, back to you for this one, if I may. It's a question that came up for me earlier in the program, the conference agenda. It has to do with prior appropriation, right? And the idea in Western water law, including in the state of Arizona, that you either use an appropriative right or use the water afforded by an appropriative right, or you lose it, right? Use it or lose it. Yeah, so the question is, Will, does moving to water-saving crops impact your water right in regards to the use it or lose it principle? Can you touch at all on conflicts with incentivizing conservation given the use it or lose it principle at a large scale?
Well, I can only specifically speak to, excuse me, got a frog in my throat every time, to our area. We've used all of the water that we've been allocated to, and we had extra ground, so we could never grow everything we wanted to from the beginning. So when we got cut, we just lowered it down. Now, for other communities, you know, where they have a higher on the grandfathered water list, and if they started using less water, there would have to be some sort of incentive because they'd be too afraid to lose it. So, you know, just like in budgets with things, some people blow budgets at the end of the year just to make sure they get the money next year because you don't know what's going to happen that year. So there'd have to be incentives, say, hey, if you save water, you know, you get a credit or something that you can still get it back, or you're banking it, or, you know, there's a bunch of different ideas about it. If you could financially incentivize the farmers to not only ruin their future potential if they needed the water in the future, or if you could keep them financially viable with a new crop, then they would be inclined to do that. But, you know, as I don't know if you've heard, the water is pretty complicated. So it'd have to be each individual district, each individual water, what their rights are. But yeah, I mean, someone's like, well, I'm going to grow corn because it will use the excess of my water and then I get my water back next year. Until that incentive is changed, someone's going to keep doing that forever. Just like a government program where they're going to go build a park in the middle of nowhere because they have 50 grand, they have to do it, you know?
Yeah, or maybe certain universities at the end of the fiscal year.
Yeah, I wouldn't say universities. I wouldn't do that.
I'm not saying anything either.
It's beautiful.
I never said that. All right, Liesel, if it's all right, I'd like to come back to you for the next one. This connects with a comment that Adele made yesterday about how water conservation for municipal water suppliers can often involve a situation where you're asking the customers to buy less of your product, right? And the economics of that. So the question is as follows: water diligence also equals maximize outputs and profit, right? How to incentivize water savings that return to the system rather than stretch further.
Is that to talk about like reusing water more than just efficiency?
I think it has to do with maintaining fiscal viability.
Yeah.
When you're asking your customer base to, again, buy less of the product. How do you keep your capital generated for infrastructure maintenance and so forth?
Yeah, there's a couple pieces there in terms of financial viability. I think one is that we need to change our communication strategies to be more around how our investments are going into their communities, how we're using their ratepayer dollars to reinvest in the system, to make it more resilient, to make it more viable, safe water into the future, and also communicating about what really goes into that. So if we don't talk to our customers and our communities and our leadership and our decision makers about what goes into this, they have nothing else to do but to come up with that storyline. And so if we can communicate every year when we approve rates or whatever cycle you're on of where those dollars are going and what they're investing. And we can really communicate about the value of having a public water system. I think that would go a long way to dismantling this. The other piece is that to my point about demand forecasting, if we've been planning for the wrong future, then yes, we're going to be in trouble when a different future arrives and we sell less water. And so being more cognizant about what our future sales and revenues are going to look like and being more creative about our business models. There's a working group that's convening around this space. Energy is light years ahead of us in this world, but there's a lot of opportunity, and some utilities have been doing this for many, many years through a couple of ways. One is debt financing their conservation programs, seeing conservation as a distributed resource that delivers benefits over time, and therefore we can pay for it over time and have less intensity around year-to-year rate changes. We can also be more creative about how we recover costs during drought and being really prepared for that, instead of a couple years after a drought being like, oh man, our reserves have gone down. And the final piece I think is around rate structures, and there can be a lot of flexibility in this space. So for example, in Los Angeles, despite the complexity of their rate structures, if you look at it, effectively works that they set a revenue target and then halfway through the year they adjust if they're under or over one way or another. And so it helps decouple from the disincentive potentially on a short-term basis to save water, but make sure that they're getting all of their costs recovered. And ultimately, there's so many different examples that show over time reduced demands over time really can achieve real-term avoided costs. And so it's a tricky story to tell. We actually have a lovely little animated video. So if you want to use it and put it on your website, feel free to reach out to me. It's freely available.
Okay. Thank you so much. We have time for probably 2 more questions. And Liesel, if I may, I'd like to stay with you for the initial one and then go back to our ag gentleman for the final. This initial question relates to gray water, I guess, as a water conservation strategy being employed. And the question is, doesn't gray water use deserve a mention as a conservation strategy, given the amount of water it can reduce for the average residential home?
Thanks, great question. And what I will first say before I get into gray water is that if you are feeling that burning fire in you of Liesel, why didn't you mention this? Why didn't you tell me about this? Or why didn't you mention this example? You can come tell me about it later and I'll use it in a future talk. And more importantly, tell other people about it. Talk to your community about it. Talk to your decision makers about it. Tell other people so that they see that there's a lot of value and they're hearing the stories. This is human-based work, and so there's so much opportunity to really do really good storytelling that's resonating with our communities. On the gray water front, yes, it's one of many strategies in the toolbox. Each community has different challenges in terms of the ability to reuse water depending on their water rights. So in some communities, they can do this, and where they can do this, many states, like for example in Colorado, have adopted some ordinances. We're seeing really an interesting lack of uptake of the ability to do this, in part because we're sort of on the early phase of this, especially in a residential sense. There's a lot more sort of reuse and recycling happening in industrial and in commercial sectors. But on the residential front, these can be very expensive systems. We're seeing some communities move toward trying to have new development be sort of gray water ready, like they're EV ready. So because it requires additional plumbing within the system. I think sometimes there's a bit of a concern around it's one more system for a homeowner to learn and manage and potentially turn off and mess up or not maintain. As a person who works with lots of people that deal with their own irrigation systems, so there's sort of a person and a cost challenge to getting greater adoption to this. So I think there's a lot of potential for it, and can be a way to help really get people thinking about this. But it's also kind of a supply and demand thing. I think gray water can work really beautifully in more of a multifamily setting, or like dormitories where you've got lots of people, lots of sources of showers to then be reused for toilet, flushing and things like that. So I'll stop there.
Thank you so much. Yeah, so for the final question, going back to Jim and Will, This is a question that relates to some of the conservation programs that have been rolled out in recent years, recent decades, actually. But Jim, I think you mentioned the pilot system conservation program in the Upper Basin that's being administered by the UCRC right now. And I know there's a counterpart to that in the Lower Basin, though I don't know that you broached it in your remarks, Will. But there's these conservation programs, right, trying to incentivize water conservation in ag. All right. So against that backdrop, the question focuses on, again, on Native peoples. So the question is, if conservation compensation is being offered to water users in the agricultural sector, how could compensation for tribes for unused or unaccessible water rights also be included in the discussion, also be available for some sort of compensation? Any thoughts on that?
My thought is that it absolutely should be included as a compensated, conserved source of water. Absolutely. It's obscenely unfair that the tribes aren't getting paid for water, a water right that they have that they're letting flow down the river and propping everything else up, subsidizing everybody else, and not getting compensated for it is awful. So yeah, if we're getting paid for conserved consumptive use, keeping water in the river, flowing to Lake Powell, obviously the tribe should be too, if they're doing a similar thing.
Yeah, I'd second that across the board. I know the local Indian community by us, Ak-Chin, they've had one of the, as you discussed, one of the first settlements. So they have a pretty good deal set up. And what's always kind of frustrated me when I hear about it is why it's, I know they're individual nations and individual peoples and stuff, but if it should be something that everyone could come together. It's like not one tribe or one community or one figured out a settlement and then it goes through like that. If any tribe anywhere has water rights or has been denied water rights, you should get incentivized through money or whatever to do that. And it should be equal for everyone across the board. It shouldn't be whoever's got the best lawyers or whatever who can, or the biggest community by numbers who's going to show up to go to battle for what's fair to them. It should be, in my opinion, equal across the board. And the same thing with farmers. It shouldn't be one person gets 25% of their water removed and they get compensated. Another person gets 25% of their water removed and doesn't get compensated. You know, I know it's impossible with all these stacked legislations over the last hundreds of years or whatever to figure out how you undo that and then have one big pact. I know everyone's been working on it for years, but that would be my thing where it should be fair and equal to everyone and incentives for everyone that are fair.
Fantastic. All right, thank you, panel.